You have to get out of here! The whole place is coming down!
Go, now!
The match trembled in Marcus Wellington's hand as he stood outside 147 West 131st Street, Harlem. His white hood felt suffocating in the humid spring air, sweat running down his neck, soaking into the rough cotton fabric. 9 men surrounded him, all dressed identically in the regalia of the Ku Klux Klan, their torches casting dancing shadows across the brownstone's facade. Inside that building, Stephanie Saint, Clair's main numbers operation, processed over $15,000 per week, the financial heart of her empire pumping money through 42 collection points across Harlem. Marcus could smell the gasoline they'd splashed across the wooden door and ground floor windows. Behind him, Samuel Whitmore, a police officer from the 28th Precinct, whispered urgently, "Light it now, before someone sees us." The plan was simple, brutal, effective. Burn the building, destroy her records, send a message that would echo through every black-owned business in Harlem. The white mob bosses who'd paid them $500 each wanted Stephanie Saint. Claire broken, terrified, ready to surrender her territory. Marcus struck the match. The flame caught, grew, and he tossed it forward. The gasoline ignited with a whoosh that made all 9 men step backward. Orange flames climbed the building's face like hungry hands reaching for the sky. They watched for exactly 90 seconds, long enough to ensure the fire had taken hold, then scattered into the darkness, their laughter echoing off the buildings. What Marcus Wellington didn't know, what none of those 9 men could have possibly known, was that at that exact moment, Stephanie St. Clair sat in a parlor 3 blocks away, slowly sipping French coffee, watching the orange glow light up the night sky through her window. She set down her cup with deliberate precision and smiled. Not the smile of someone watching their empire burn, the smile of someone who had just watched their trap spring shut. "Gentlemen," she said to the 3 men seated across from her, "they took the bait. Now we go fishing." 5 days later, those same 9 Klansmen would be screaming confessions in a Harlem warehouse, begging for mercy they didn't deserve, learning too late that they hadn't attacked Stephanie St. Clair. They'd attacked a woman who'd spent 3 months preparing for this exact moment, who'd turned their arrogance into a noose, and who understood something they never would. Real power isn't about who can destroy the most. It's about who can see the furthest ahead. Context: understanding the Queen of Harlem. To understand what happened in that warehouse on May 22, 1929, you need to understand who Stephanie St. Clair really was. She wasn't just another numbers banker. By 1929, she controlled the most sophisticated illegal lottery operation in New York City, employing over 200 runners, processing bets from more than 30,000 regular customers, and generating gross revenues exceeding $800,000 annually. That's more than most legitimate corporations in America at the time. But money alone didn't make Madame St. Clair dangerous. What made her truly formidable was her mind. Born in Martinique in 1886, she'd arrived in America in 1912, speaking almost no English, working as a domestic servant for $3 per week. Within 15 years, she'd built an empire. She'd done it by understanding 3 fundamental truths that her competitors, both black and white, consistently failed to grasp. First, information was more valuable than muscle. St. Clair maintained an intelligence network that would have impressed military strategists. She knew which police officers took bribes, which politicians had gambling debts, which mobsters were planning moves into Harlem. She kept meticulous files documenting everything, building leverage everywhere. Second, loyalty couldn't be bought, only earned. Unlike other operators who ruled through fear, St. Clair paid her runners above market rates, provided bail money when they were arrested, helped their families when they were sick. Her people didn't work for her because they feared her. They worked for her because she'd proven again and again that she valued them. Third, and most importantly, she understood that her real enemy wasn't other numbers bankers or even the police. Her real enemy was the white mob bosses who looked at Harlem and saw billions of dollars in untapped revenue. Men like Dutch Schultz, who'd already begun muscling into Harlem's operations. Men who believed that a black woman, no matter how successful, would eventually fold when faced with real pressure. The antagonist in this story wasn't one man. It was an entire system of white supremacy, backed by mob money, corrupt police, and Ku Klux Klan terrorism. They'd burned black businesses before. They'd driven black entrepreneurs out of other neighborhoods. They had every reason to believe Harlem would be the same. They were catastrophically wrong. Flashback. The setup. 3 months earlier, February 14th, 1929. Samuel Whitmore sat in the basement of O'Malley's Tavern on the Lower East Side, a cops bar where men spoke freely because everyone was dirty. Across from him sat Vincent Cole, one of Dutch Schultz's enforcers, a man with cold eyes and a reputation for extreme violence. "We need an inside angle," Cole said, sliding a glass of whiskey across the scarred wooden table. "Schultz wants St. Clair's operation, but she's got Harlem locked down tight. We hit her runners. She replaces them. We threaten her. She goes to the newspapers. We need something bigger, something that breaks her." Whitmore, a 15-year veteran of the NYPD who'd been on Schultz's payroll for the last 8, leaned forward. "What did you have in mind?" "Fire," Cole said simply. "Burn her main counting house. Destroy her records, her money, her confidence. Show the whole neighborhood that she can't protect them. Once she's vulnerable, Schultz moves in, makes an offer she can't refuse." "That's in the middle of Harlem," Whitmore protested. "People see white guys torching a building, there'll be riots." Cole smiled, a predator's expression. "That's why we don't go in as white guys. We go in wearing hoods, make it look like the Klan. Blame it on racial terrorism instead of business competition. St. Clair can't fight back against that without looking like she's starting a race war." "It's perfect." He pushed an envelope across the table. $500 per man. I need 8 more besides you. Cops, preferably. Guys who know how to keep their mouths shut. You get them together. We provide the materials. You do the job." Whitmore opened the envelope. 5 crisp $100 bills. 6 months' salary for 1 night's work. He had a daughter who needed surgery, medical bills stacking up, a wife who'd stopped looking at him with anything except disappointment. This money could change everything. "When?" he asked. "Soon. We're finalizing details, but Whitmore?" Cole's voice dropped. "This stays quiet. You breathe a word to anyone, and it won't be just you who pays. Your wife, your daughter, everyone you've ever cared about. Schultz doesn't leave loose ends. Understand?" Whitmore understood. He understood that he was selling his soul. He understood that burning an occupied building could kill people. He understood that he was about to commit an act of terrorism for money. But he looked at those $500 and made a choice that thousands of desperate men had made before him. He chose survival over morality. "I'll get you your men," he said. What Whitmore didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Vincent Cole had been followed to O'Malley's Tavern that night. A young black man named Jerome Thompson, one of St. Clair's most trusted intelligence operatives, sat 3 booths away, reading a newspaper, listening to every word. Jerome had been tracking Cole for 6 weeks, ever since St. Clair had paid him $50 to become Cole's shadow. When Jerome saw Cole meet with a police officer, when he saw money change hands, he knew immediately that this was important. He waited until both men left, gave them 5 minutes head start, then walked briskly to a pay phone on the corner of Delancey Street. He dropped in a nickel and dialed a number he'd memorized but never written down. "Madame," he said when the line connected. "They're planning something big." Flashback continued, recruiting the conspirators. Over the next 3 weeks, Samuel Whitmore recruited 8 men. All were police officers from precincts in and around Harlem. All were white. All were in debt or desperate or angry at a world that hadn't given them what they thought they deserved. Marcus Wellington, who'd lost his sergeant's promotion to a man with better political connections. Frank Morrison, whose wife had left him, taking half of everything. Patrick O'Brien, who drank away his paycheck and needed money for his gambling debts. They met in basements and back rooms, always careful, always paranoid. Whitmore showed them the money, explained the plan, and watched as each man's resistance crumbled in the face of $500. By early May, he had his crew. Vincent Cole provided the materials: gasoline in unmarked cans, Klan robes and hoods purchased from a sympathetic supplier in Georgia, detailed maps of St. Clair's operation showing the location of 147 West 131st Street. He also provided assurance. "She's just a colored woman running an illegal operation," Cole told them at their final planning meeting on May 15th. You burn the building, she loses everything. Her records, her money, her reputation. Without those records, she can't prove who owes her what. Her whole operation collapses. And even if she suspects who did it, what's she gonna do? Go to the police? He laughed at his own joke. Half the men in the room were police. What if someone's inside? Marcus Wellington asked, voicing the concern that had kept him awake for nights. Intelligence says the building's empty after midnight, Call replied smoothly. She counts money there during the day, but at night, it's vacant. We're hitting it at 2:45 a.m. Nobody gets hurt, just property damage. It was a lie, but it was a lie these men wanted to believe, so they did. What none of them knew was that every one of these meetings had been observed. St. Clair's intelligence network was more sophisticated than any of them imagined. She had people everywhere, waitresses who lingered near tables, janitors who cleaned offices after hours, street vendors who noticed patterns. When 9 white police officers start meeting secretly, people notice. When they start asking questions about locations in Harlem, word travels fast. By May 10th, 1 week before the planned attack, Stephanie St. Clair knew every detail. She knew the date, the time, the target, and the names of all 9 conspirators. She sat in her office with Jerome Thompson and 2 other trusted advisors, studying the intelligence like a general reviewing battlefield maps. We could go to the police, Jerome suggested. We have evidence, witnesses. St. Clair laughed, a sound without humor. Half of these men are police, Jerome. The other half are protected by Dutch Schultz. No, we don't go to the police. We go to war. But not the war they expect. The counter-move. St. Clair's preparation. What Samuel Whitmore didn't know, what Vincent Cole didn't know, what Dutch Schultz himself didn't know, was that Stephanie St. Clair had been waiting for this exact attack for months. She'd known it was coming. The pattern was too obvious. Every time white mobsters wanted to take over a black neighborhood's illegal economy, they followed the same playbook: intimidation, violence, and if those failed, spectacular destruction meant to break morale. So she'd prepared. 3 months earlier, she'd quietly moved her actual counting operation to a different location, a brownstone on 140th Street owned under a false name through a complex series of shell corporations. The building at 147 West 131st Street. It still looked like a numbers house. It still had runners coming and going during the day, but the money they carried was minimal. The records they processed were duplicates, and most importantly, the building had been rigged. St. Clair had hired Moses Johnson, a former Army combat engineer who'd served in France during the Great War. Moses knew explosives, construction, and most importantly, how to make a building look occupied when it was actually empty. Together, they'd turned 147 West 131st Street into the world's most expensive mousetrap. We need them to commit fully, St. Clair had explained to Moses in February. We need them to actually attack, to actually commit arson, to actually believe they've won. Only then will they be vulnerable. Moses had installed a sophisticated system of mirrors and lights that could be operated remotely, making the building appear occupied from the outside. He'd removed anything truly valuable and replaced financial records with carefully crafted fakes. And most importantly, he'd installed cameras. Yes, cameras. In 1929, this was cutting-edge technology, expensive and rare, but St. Clair had paid $3,000 for 3 16mm film cameras to be installed in hidden positions around the building, positioned to capture clear footage of anyone who approached. She'd hired 2 camera operators, sworn to secrecy and paid handsomely, to man those cameras from concealed positions in neighboring buildings. "You're spending a fortune on this," one of her advisors had protested. "What if they don't come?" "Oh, they'll come," St. Clair had replied with absolute certainty. Men like Schultz can't help themselves. They see a black woman succeeding and they have to tear her down. It's not even about money for them, it's about power, about maintaining their sense of superiority. They'll come, and when they do, we'll have proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. St. Clair understood that in America in 1929, proof of white men committing crimes against black victims rarely led to justice. The legal system was designed to protect men like Whitmore and his crew. So she needed something more. She needed leverage. She needed confession. She needed to make them afraid of something worse than the law. She needed to make them afraid of her. The attack, May 17, 1929, 2:47 a.m., captured on film. Camera 1, positioned in a third-floor window across the street, captured the whole scene. 9 figures in white robes approaching the building, the splash of gasoline clearly visible in the streetlight, the match being struck, the moment of ignition, the flames climbing the building's face as the 9 men watched, their body language radiating satisfaction and triumph. Camera 2, positioned on a rooftop with a telephoto lens, captured faces. Marcus Wellington removing his hood for just a moment to wipe sweat from his brow, his features clearly visible. Samuel Whitmore's distinctive walk, a limp from an old injury that made him unmistakable. Patrick O'Brien's nervous habit of touching his face, captured in perfect detail. Camera 3, positioned low and close, captured the getaway. The direction they fled, the cars they climbed into, even the license plate numbers clearly visible in the firelight. 3 blocks away, Stephanie St. Clair watched through binoculars as her numbers house burned. The building was insured, of course, and the insurance company would pay out. But more importantly, she now had everything she needed. "Did we get it all?" she asked the camera operator beside her, a young man named David Chen who trained as a cinematographer before the Depression killed Hollywood's expansion plans. "Every frame, madame," David confirmed. "Clear footage of all 9 subjects. You'll be able to identify every man." "Good," St. Clair said, lowering her binoculars. "Now we wait. Let them think they've won. Let them celebrate. Let them feel safe. And then, in 5 days, we show them what real power looks like." The trap closes May 22, 1929, 11:30 p.m. Samuel Whitmore walked down a dark Harlem street, heading toward what he thought was a meeting with Vincent Cole to collect a bonus payment. The note had been clear: additional $500 for a job well done. Meet at the warehouse on 125th Street, come alone. He should have been suspicious. He should have questioned why Cole wanted to meet in Harlem instead of their usual downtown locations. He should have wondered why the streets were so empty, so quiet. But greed and relief had made him stupid. The fire had happened 5 days ago and nothing had come of it. No investigation, no arrests, no retaliation. They'd gotten away with it, or so he thought. Whitmore entered the warehouse through a side door that had been left conveniently unlocked. Inside, the space was dark except for a single light hanging in the center. As his eyes adjusted, he saw 8 other men already there, his entire crew, all looking confused, all checking their watches. "Did Cole call all of you?" Marcus Wellington asked, his voice uncertain. Before anyone could answer, the warehouse doors slammed shut with a sound like thunder. Locks clicked into place, and then the lights came on, bright and blinding, revealing a scene that would haunt these 9 men for the rest of their lives. Stephanie St. Clair stood on a raised platform at the far end of the warehouse, flanked by 20 men. But these weren't street thugs or hired muscle. These were Harlem's most respected figures: ministers, businessmen, veterans, community leaders, men whose presence added weight and legitimacy to whatever was about to happen. And behind them, projected onto a massive white sheet hung from the warehouse ceiling, was film footage of 9 men in Klan robes burning a building. The moment of truth, the screening. "Gentlemen," St. Clair's voice rang out, calm and clear, each word precisely enunciated with her slight French-Caribbean accent. She wore a dark blue dress with a fox fur stole, diamonds at her throat, every inch the queen these men had tried to destroy. "I believe you recognize this footage." The film played on loop. There was no sound except the whir of the projector, but none was needed. The images spoke for themselves: the approach, the gasoline, the match, the fire, and, most damningly, the faces. Marcus Wellington, without his hood. Samuel Whitmore's distinctive limp. Every man in the warehouse could be identified beyond any doubt. "That's not us," Patrick O'Brien stammered, his face pale. "That could be anyone." St. Clair smiled. She nodded to Jerome Thompson, who stepped forward with a wooden box. He opened it to reveal 9 Klan hoods, each labeled with a name written in careful script. "These were found in your homes this evening," St. Clair said. "While you were being lured here, my people were executing search warrants." "Oh, I'm sorry, did I say warrants? I meant they were conducting their own private investigations. They found these hoods. They also found receipts from the gasoline purchase, notes from your planning meetings, and most interestingly, $500 in marked bills in each of your homes. Bills whose serial numbers I recorded before they were given to you by Vincent Coll. The color drained from 9 faces simultaneously. Samuel Whitmore felt his legs go weak. This wasn't possible. They'd been so careful. They'd covered their tracks. How had she known? How had she gotten into their homes? How had she been so far ahead of them? Here's what's going to happen now, St. Clair continued, her voice never rising above conversational level. The calmness was somehow more terrifying than any scream could have been. You have 2 choices. Choice 1. I take this film, along with all the evidence my people collected, and I deliver it to the newspapers. Not the police, because we both know how that would end. The newspapers, the Amsterdam News, the New York Age, the Crisis magazine. I make you famous. I make your faces known to every black person in America as the men who burned down a Harlem business while dressed as Klansmen. I let the community decide what justice looks like. She paused, letting that sink in. The implications were clear. In 1929, extrajudicial justice was still common. Lynchings happened regularly, and while they predominantly targeted black victims, the rage that would follow this revelation could easily flow the other direction. These 9 men would become targets, and no amount of police protection could save them. What's choice 2? Marcus Wellington asked, his voice barely a whisper. Choice 2, St. Clair said, is confession. Full, complete, detailed confession. You tell me everything: who hired you, who planned it, how much you were paid, what other operations Schultz is planning in Harlem. You give me everything, and I mean everything. And in exchange, I don't destroy your lives. The film stays private. The evidence stays in my possession. You walk out of here tonight. And then what? Samuel Whitmore had found his voice, though it shook. You use that evidence to blackmail us forever. No, St. Clair replied, and her voice carried a note of something that might have been disappointment. I'm not interested in owning you, Officer Whitmore. I'm interested in sending a message. You see, you and your friends were hired to break me, to terrorize me, to show Harlem that I couldn't protect them from white violence. But what you actually did was give me the most valuable gift imaginable: proof that the white mob is so desperate to take my territory that they're willing to commit terrorism. She walked forward slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. The 9 men unconsciously stepped backward. I'm going to use your confessions to destroy Dutch Schultz's expansion into Harlem. I'm going to make sure every newspaper, every politician, every honest cop in this city knows that he orchestrated a Klan attack on a black business. I'm going to make him toxic, and you 9 are going to help me do it. The confessions, May 22nd, 23rd, 1929, 12 a.m., 5:47 a.m. They broke one by one, starting with Patrick O'Brien, whose gambling debts and drinking had left him with the weakest constitution. He started talking at 12:23 a.m., and once he started, he couldn't stop. He told them about the meetings with Vincent Coll, the payments, the planning sessions. He named names, provided dates, described conversations in painful detail. Marcus Wellington held out until 1:15 a.m., when St. Clair had her people bring in his wife Charlotte, who'd been invited to witness the proceedings. The sight of his wife's face, the disappointment and horror in her eyes as she saw the film footage of her husband in a Klan hood, shattered his resolve. He confessed through tears, his voice breaking as he described how he'd rationalized it all, how he'd convinced himself he was just following orders, just trying to provide for his family. Samuel Whitmore was last, holding out until 3:30 a.m. He'd been a cop for 15 years, had interrogated hundreds of suspects, knew every trick and tactic. But St. Clair didn't use tricks or tactics. She simply sat across from him in a small office set up in the corner of the warehouse and waited. She drank coffee. She read a newspaper. She acted like she had all the time in the world. St. Clair looked up from her newspaper, her eyes meeting his without anger, without hatred, just a kind of weary certainty. Because you need to understand something, Officer Whitmore. You and men like you look at people like me, and you see something less than human. You see a black woman, a criminal, someone whose business you can burn, whose life you can destroy without consequence. You see someone who doesn't deserve respect or fear or consideration. And that fundamental misunderstanding is why you're here, In this warehouse, your life in ruins. She leaned forward. I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing this because every person in Harlem needs to know that they're protected, that I don't just run a numbers operation, I defend a community. And every white mobster who thinks they can walk into Harlem and take what's ours needs to know that they're making a mistake that will cost them everything. Whitmore confessed at 3:47 a.m. The stenographer St. Clair had hired, a black woman named Alice Jennings, who'd worked as a court reporter before being forced out by discrimination, typed every word. By 5:47 a.m., she had 9 complete signed confessions, each one notarized by a Harlem notary public, who'd been awakened and brought to the warehouse specifically for this purpose. The 9 men left the warehouse as the sun rose over Harlem, walking out into a world where they were no longer predators but prey, where the evidence of their crime existed in multiple forms and locations, where Stephanie St. Clair held their lives in her hands. The aftermath. The message spreads. By noon on May 23rd, copies of the confessions had been delivered to 5 locations: the office of the Amsterdam News, the NAACP headquarters, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, the FBI's New York Field Office, and most importantly, Dutch Schultz's personal attorney. The message was clear. Any further moves against Stephanie St. Clair would result in the full publication of these confessions, turning Schultz's attempt to expand into Harlem into a national scandal involving police corruption, organized crime, and racial terrorism. The political cost would be catastrophic. Schultz received the message while eating breakfast at his usual restaurant. His attorney laid out the confessions, the film footage, the evidence. For one of the few times in his life, Dutch Schultz had no response. He'd been outmaneuvered completely, checkmated by a woman he'd dismissed as an easy target. "What do you want me to do?" his attorney asked. Schultz was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound of genuine amazement. "Nothing, we do nothing. We stay the hell away from Harlem. This woman just declared war on us and won before we even knew we were fighting." He pushed his breakfast away, appetite gone. "Send word to everyone. Stephanie St. Clair's territory is off limits. Anyone who goes near her operations answers to me personally, and make sure every operator in the city knows what happened here." The attorney nodded. "What should I tell them?" "Tell them the truth," Schultz replied. "Tell them that 9 men tried to burn her out, and 5 days later they were screaming confessions in a warehouse. Tell them that she had cameras we didn't know about, informants we couldn't identify, and intelligence that made us look like children playing gangster. Tell them that Stephanie St. Clair is the most dangerous person in Harlem, and we're staying far away from her." Legacy. The lessons of May 1929. The story of the 9 Klansmen spread through the criminal underworld like wildfire. It became legend, growing in the telling, but the core truth remained. Stephanie St. Clair had turned an attack meant to destroy her into a demonstration of power that protected her empire for years to come. But here's the thing that most people miss when they tell this story. They focus on the drama, the confessions, the moment of triumph. They miss the deeper lesson that St. Clair was teaching, not just to those 9 men, but to anyone who paid attention. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about violence meeting violence. It was about the fundamental difference between force and power. Force is what those 9 men used when they burned her building. Force is immediate, visible, satisfying in its directness. But force is also temporary, crude, and ultimately self-defeating. Power, real power, is what St. Clair demonstrated. Power is preparation. It's intelligence gathering. It's seeing 3 moves ahead while your opponent is still planning their first move. It's understanding that the real battle isn't fought with fire and violence, but with information, leverage, and strategic thinking. St. Clair could have responded to the attack with violence. She had the resources, the connections, the justification. She could have had those 9 men killed, their families threatened, their lives destroyed through direct action. That's what they expected. That's what they understood. Instead, she did something far more devastating. She made them destroy themselves. She created conditions where their own actions became the weapon used against them. She turned their crime into her leverage, their violence into her protection, their attempt to terrorize into her triumph. Stephanie St. Clair continued operating in Harlem for another 2 decades. She eventually stepped back from the numbers racket, but remained a powerful voice in the community, fighting against police corruption, advocating for civil rights, and mentoring younger operators in the art of strategic thinking. When she died in 1969 at the age of 82, she was remembered not as a criminal, but as a protector, a strategist, and a woman who'd proven that intelligence and preparation could overcome any amount of brute force. The 9 men who'd burned her building lived out their lives in quiet obscurity, always looking over their shoulders, always aware that evidence of their crime existed somewhere in Stephanie St. Clair's files, always one mistake away from having their past revealed. Several left New York entirely. 2 died young, drinking themselves to death. None ever spoke publicly about what happened in that warehouse, but the story spread anyway, whispered in the way dangerous truths always spread. Hand Dutch Schultz. He stayed away from Harlem for years after that incident. When he finally made another move into St. Clair's territory in the mid-1930s, it was with negotiation, not violence, offering partnership instead of demanding surrender. Even then, he approached cautiously, knowing that the woman across the table had already beaten him once. The final lesson, the one that matters most, isn't about crime or gambling, or even the specific conflict between St. Clair and her enemies. It's about a fundamental truth that applies to any arena where power is contested. The person who wins isn't always the strongest or the most violent or the most ruthless. Often the person who wins is simply the one who prepared better, who thought further ahead, who understood that the real battle happens in the mind long before it happens in the streets. They thought they could burn Stephanie St. Clair down. 5 days later, they were screaming confessions, and their screams echoed through Harlem's underworld for decades, a permanent reminder that intelligence beats force, preparation beats impulse, and strategic thinking beats violence every single time. The match that Marcus Wellington struck at 2:47 a.m. on May 17, 1929, did burn down a building. But it also lit a flame of understanding that burned far longer. Never underestimate the person who smiles while watching their empire burn, because they're seeing something you can't see yet. They're seeing your defeat in their apparent destruction, and by the time you understand what happened, it's already far too late.